So this is part 51 of our Wild Harvest Edible series, Thou Preparest the Table Before Me. And just a reminder, an important note that if you are implementing anything that's noted here in regards to a health challenge, that you enlist a medical practitioner that shares a philosophy of care that's similar to yours. That makes it just more efficient and flow easier as you coordinate together to come back to health. So information is provided as a wellness toolbox implement that can help return you to wellness if you are sick, and maintaining good health if you're well. It shouldn't be considered medical advice, just tools that have been used by others in similar situations. Always check out and investigate any treatment or protocol or procedure for yourself, not blindly accepting anything without due diligence. That's essentially what we call being Berean, checking out to see if what has been said is so. And we need to continue to be very Berean in all that we encounter throughout life. The doctor of the future, Thomas Edison, said, will give no medicine, but will instruct his patient in the care of the human frame and diet and in the cause and prevention of disease. Back in 1885, Ellen White stated that there are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there's only one way that heaven approves. God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties. Pure air and water, cleanliness, a proper diet, purity of life, and a firm trust in God are remedies, the want of which thousands are dying. Yet these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that the people do not appreciate. It takes effort, in other words. Fresh air, exercise, pure water, and clean, sweet premises are within the reach of all, with but little expense. But drugs are expensive, both in the outlay of means and the effect produced upon the system. It's interesting, I may have mentioned this before at one time, that one of the things that's a benefit of the medical missionary work and the fact that you use things that take a longer period of time to implement, such as hydrotherapy, that the gospel presentation is not something that can be given in just 5 minutes. It actually takes a little bit of time. And when someone is having some hydrotherapy treatments or some other intervention that can help them, that takes some time to implement, you have the opportunity to spend time with them and share the gospel presentation in a more relaxed pace than if you were just trying to get the numbers and popping the pills and chinging the cash register. So it actually sets itself right up for the right arm of the gospel, which is the medical missionary work. In 3 John 1:2 states, beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. And in Romans 12:1 and 2, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We may have to think differently, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Differently from what we've been taught or trained, because we have lived in the world so long that many of the philosophies that we've adopted or been steeped in are worldly philosophies and we don't even know it. We need to have our mind transformed into the character of God and knowing what he wants for us to do. Today's first plant that we'll look at is one that many may already have in their gardens. It's actually one that actually can escape and grow in other places unaided. It's called the Daylily Hermitcalis, and there are many different species of the daylily. The main one is the upper right one there, the tiger lily, essentially, or the daylily. That's an herbaceous plant. The leaves are grass-like, although much thicker than grass in their presentation. It grows up year after year from tubers that are in the ground from the beds. I remember growing up along our back alley, we had a brick wall that had a whole bunch of those every year. And never once, I think I knew that they were edible, but never once did I step out and try eating them. We have some actually growing here in a small patch that I may try to encourage a little bit more intentionally. Turns out that they can spread a little bit too. So in some places they can be a little bit invasive in the garden. People tend to break them up a little bit and spread them out or hand them out. But they are such that they come back year after year. They come from a basal rosette. The leaves come up and arch down, as you can see in the lower right photograph. Very brilliant flowers. The flower stalks can get up to 6 feet tall. And they're called the daylily because their blossoms come and bloom, and then they're done for that day. The tastiest species is the Hermitcalis fulva genus and species, although there are many other different species and they're all edible. This one just happens to be the tastiest. So the flower is also known as the Tawny Daylily. You can see that there. There's the tiger lily, actually is a wild variant of this that one can see in the North Cascades. It would also have edibility of the same fashion, but it has an upward facing tube with 6 petals that are fused, and they have a really kind of a neat stripe of a lighter color that is the throat color that extends all the way up the petal, and a midline all the way to the tip of the petal. It's contrasting to the typical color of the petal. Each stalk can have up to 20 different flowers, and they open successfully over a period of days. So one will open or 2 will open, and then they'll be done for the day, and then the next one will continue to grow and open on successive days. So here's just an idea of what the vast variety of daylilies are. You can buy them in the store. Although the ones bought in the store, I wouldn't necessarily use them for culinary purposes just because you don't know how they've been grown. And sometimes they add them into a flower life lengthener, so to speak. You see the little packets that come in flower arrangements that are there to help provide minerals and whatnot to help preserve the flowers and help them last longer. So I would be hesitant to use a daylily purchased from a greenhouse, for example. So the one on the upper left has a neat name called the Lake of Fire. But the leaves are grass-like in nature. You can see them along the back fence there in the lower left. Sometimes they can look really green. These look a little bit browner. Maybe it's the summertime, but you can see they're quite tall, up to 3 or 4 feet tall. And they'll grow all summer long and just kind of bloom all through the summertime. So the edibility, the flowers, the buds, the young shoots, and the roots are all edible. So on the right, you see a batch of the buds that have been picked off. And these are pre-blooming buds, naturally. You can pick the flowers and dry them and use them. You can use them fresh. So you can decorate salads with the freshly opened flowers. You can blanch them and then dry them, blanch them or dry them. The unopened buds, you can eat them raw, just break them off and eat them straight away, or cook them. You can saute them lightly. The young shoots and leaves are eaten raw or cooked. So again, they're edible both raw or cooked. They tend to become fibrous with age. So the older ones tend to be tougher to eat. The young tubers or the roots, you can eat them raw or cooked. So they have a similar consistency to a fingerlinged potato. So they're tiny in that regard. They're not as big as a potato. You can even make pickles out of the blossoms. So here's an oil-free daylily saute. It makes 4 servings. You want to collect about 20 to 30 buds of the daylilies. And it turns out that the garlic scapes begin appearing about the time that daylily blooms. So it's a good natural kind of complement. So get some garlic scapes. Those are the top buds that shoot up a shoot from a garlic that's growing. About 15 of those minced, or you can use garlic and just add them as you wish. And then a half a cup of water in a frying pan and saute them in water. You don't need to use any oil. Oil could become quite scarce, and we just don't need that extra oil in that free oil in our diet. There's going to be fat in every living thing. So every plant has fat in it because cell walls are made up of fat, and those plants that have the most fat are the seeds and nuts. And then salt it to taste. So here's some different presentations, a couple salad presentations using petals of the daylily on the salad on the right. On the left, you got a whole flower sitting there on the edge of your salad. And it's one of those edible flowers. And if you didn't know it, you might just set it aside and think, oh, how pretty. But you can just go ahead and chomp away at it. Nasturtiums are another one that are often used in salads, flowers, pansies, other things like that. And they're all edible flowers that can be eaten right along with your salad. The tubers down below, you can see the fresh ones that have just been picked from the garden. And on the right, you have some that have been cleaned, washed, and perhaps even boiled there prior to use. That would give them a potato-like consistency. But once you've cleaned the root hairs and the dirt away, you can just eat them raw, as noted earlier. So here's an example of the different parts again. So you can eat the tubers and the leaves together. Looks like a little stir fry going on there. You can see that the upper right picture has both the young shoots as well as the tubers that have been cleaned and then cut there. You can dry the flowers and use them at a future time. You have a picture of the blossoms there, as well as the buds, the fresh shoots and stalks there, and the tubers. So all of those parts are edible just as you see them there, raw as well as cooked. So some medicinal usages, they may benefit fever reduction. They can also help with some pain relief and help to fight infection. The roots have some anti-tumor compounds. There's a paper that was written by Chikovets et al. And his co-authors in Life Science in 2004 that talked about the inhibition of human tumor cell proliferation by novel anthraquinones from daylilies. So anthraquinone is a cytotoxic specifically for colon cancer. The flowers have mild laxative effects, as well as being antispasmodic, anti-emetic, that is, it prevents or reduces vomiting. It's a blood purifier, so other things that are blood purifying that come to mind right away are dandelion and cat's ear, a sedative, mild sedative, and a febrifuge, which can help reduce fevers. From a nutritional standpoint, they have respectable amounts of the three primary nutrients: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Also beta carotene. The bright color there, particularly of the fulva species, indicates the presence of the beta carotene. You can see quite a field of daylilies here on the lower right picture. Not ever seen them quite that expansive, but they definitely have that potential depending on where they're growing. Calcium, potassium, and vitamin C are also present. So one thing you want to be sure is to not confuse the daylily with iris. So iris have a flat leaf presentation and generally grow in more moist areas, but not always. The wild iris grow in almost, their roots are completely covered by water, but you don't want to have them eaten with as iris eaten as daylily. So they have a different kind of a bud arrangement, and their flower structure is not symmetrical, like the daylily is very symmetrical. The next one is a very fun one. This is one of the ones that I found being very fun moving to the Pacific Northwest. It's called elephant head lousewort, Pedicularis gronathatica. And the elephant's head, you can just see why it got its name. You see the trunk there sticking out, and it looks like the nice forehead of the elephant, and the ears are present there, all in this spike. It's a native of the Pacific Northwest. It likes moist low-lying meadows, bogs, and wetlands, subalpine areas and riverbanks. It's essentially west of the Rockies. So it's all up into Canada and Alaska. Its species name, Groenlandica, means of Greenland. It's also a native species that's found on the island of Greenland. It's actually a parasitic plant. It's a perennial, but it grows on the roots of other plants nearby. It can grow up to over 2 feet tall. It has a reddish purple stem, and the roots are sometimes visible when you look at the plant closely. The flower is 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch big, and it blooms from June to August. Pink and purplish in coloration, up to 18 inches on just the flower spike alone, and very, very reminiscent of a trumpeting elephant. We'll see one up here a little bit closer here in just a moment. So the leaf is fern-like, it's lance-shaped, but it's very fern-like. You can see the diagram down below there. And it was first collected by Meriwether Lewis, July 6, 1806 in Montana on the voyage of discovery on their journey from Missouri all the way across to the Pacific Ocean. And it's interesting to note that they didn't lose a single man going across or back on that very long, arduous journey going up the rivers and over the mountains. John Coltier was one of the party, and he actually asked for a discharge in the Wyoming area, and he was the one who discovered Yellowstone, what is today Yellowstone National Park, and later convinced the public and the powers that be that there actually was a place as beautiful as Yellowstone. And then it became a national park some years later. So the edible parts are the leaves and the flowers. So the leaves you can see down low, they look a little bit like fern, very fern-like. And then the flowers are up on the spike that are up above the ground. The flowers should be harvested when they're freshly opened. Leave twice as many flowers as you take. That helps to ensure reseeding. You can dry them for use in a tea. They're best harvested, the leaves, before the plant flowers. So that would take some knowledge of the plant being present beforehand, or being able to recognize what it is and knowing that you're actually getting that. I don't know that there are any toxic lookalikes, but you'd want to make sure that you had elephant head before you just went chomping on the leaves. They can be cooked and eaten very similar to spinach. You can add the finely chopped leaves to any soup, just like you would dill or parsley. Be cautious about overdoing it. Large quantities can be considered poisonous, so it shouldn't consider or consist of the main course or the main part of your diet, just as an ancillary component to one's diet. So some medicinal uses: has a mildly relaxing effect, helps with joint and muscle pain or spasms. You can see some nice tall flower spikes there along that rushing mountain stream. It's a pain killer, helps with muscle spasms. It anxiolytic, which is an anti-anxiety that could be very, very helpful depending on the situation. Sometimes people have overwhelming anxiety that can essentially incapacitate them, and this could be an emergency measure to help with that type of a situation. Also can function as a sedative. So because it's parasitic, it has a tendency to accumulate alkaloids from nearby plants if those nearby plants happen to have various alkaloids in them. So knowing their host plant is helpful in knowing whether you would want to consume their leaves or flowers in any quantity. I saw some note on this in an herbal guide where they were selling elephant head, and they made it quite clear that they sold their product from elephant head that was not collected near any alkaloid plants. So it actually grows on the roots of the plants around it. It's interesting that it is photosynthetic, but it does happen to be parasitic as far as its root structure goes. So you can make a vegetable glycerin tincture that can be used internally or externally. If you had an alcohol tincture, you would only want to use it externally if you were choosing to avoid the consumption of any kind of alcohol, which is a good idea. So for muscle pain and cramping, 1 teaspoon of tincture with water every 6 hours or 3 times a day. So if you had some muscle pain or cramping that was just really debilitating, this could be one way to mitigate that. For insomnia, 1/2 to 1 teaspoon of tincture with a small amount of water before bedtime can help with sleeping. So the range of elephant's head, again, it's west of the Rockies. You can see the green areas are the areas where it has been founded. It also includes Alaska and much of Canada. And it's just a really fun find to stumble onto elephant head, because it just really does look like a whole host of elephants that are up on the top of a spike and presenting themselves to the world for all to see. So to look at this presentation again and study it in more detail if you wish, just go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com, where this will be archived.